So are you ready to get started to create our datasets for our report inventory by location? Let's have a look at how we are going to do this. So the first thing we are going to do is we are going to build a dataset, and we are going to do that in the report dataset designer. Let's go over to the application. So I have created a new report. The first thing that we do, presuming that we have already thought a little bit about our data model, is that we are going to fetch information from a table. We need to present the inventory by location. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make use of table 27, which is actually the item table. In the item table, I will fetch information from the item itself. And that will be, for example, the number and the description itself. So I'm going to select the fields, I'm going to add them in the dataset. Then I'm also requiring information about the inventory. And actually the inventory is coming from the item ledger entry table. And so I'm just going to type in the name, and as you will see, there is an auto-completion. And from the ledger entry table, what am I going to select? I'm going to find the location code, and I'm going to use the quantity. Actually, inventory is considered as being the sum of the quantity by location. And every time we are going to post usage for an item, it's going to end up into the item ledger entry table. So I'm going to make use actually of two data items. I'm going to make use of the item table. I'm going to make use of the item ledger entry table. Now what I also am going to do is I might have to go here in the properties of the item data item and make use of the data item table view property to, for example, apply a filter. What do I need to do with specific items that I don't want to see? So on any field here, I can apply a filter. And the same is actually also going to be valid for the second data item. Next, I might also define some variables. What am I going to do? I'm going to create a variable, call it height details, and then make it a Boolean. And I'm also going to add it into the design of the report. I'm going to add it as an extra column, and later we are going to see what happens if we run the report. Now I'm just going to save my report at the moment. I'm going to give it a number, and I'm going to call it the inventory reports. So I'm just going to save it. And actually what we then can do is we can run the report. We can do that very quickly by going into the file menu, and then you can select run, or you can just click Ctrl R. Apparently I have to rename my reports. So what am I going to do? I'm going to give it another number, because there already was a report with that number in the database. And very quickly go to run the reports. Ctrl R is the shortcut that I'm using. As you can see, we have a request page. I will explain later why that is the case. I don't have a layout yet for my report, but I will be able to visualize the dataset. How do I do this? Well, in the request page, I'm going to activate the feature via about this page. The feature is now activated. Then I will go into preview. There is no layout yet, as we will notice in a few seconds. But I can go again into the application menu, go into help, activate about this report, and now I'm going to see the dataset which is generated. As you can see, I have columns in here in the dataset. It is a flat dataset. It consists out of rows and columns. And all of the columns in the dataset designer have become columns here in the dataset at runtime. And if I scroll down, you will be able to see the individual values of the fields. So after I create my dataset, I always run my report. And then I'm going to have a look at, okay, this is the dataset in the dataset designer. What is the runtime dataset? And do I see the information in there in a format that I expected to see in? So this is actually how we can get started to create the data model for our report. So after we create the datasets, and what we're going to do now is we're going to add some labels. Let's see how we can do this. So actually, captions and labels are things that we are going to add in our datasets whenever we would like something to be translated in the layout. And we're going to do this in two ways. We can make use of the include caption, which is a property on the column level, and we can use the label designer. Now, the effect of the two properties is going to be almost the same. Let's demonstrate this in the application. So here I am in my application, and as you will notice, every column in the dataset has properties. One of these properties is the include caption property. So you need to individually activate it. So for every column, you can do this by going into the properties or by selecting the include caption. If I'm going to do this, it means that the caption is going to be sent to the layouts, allowing me, for example, to use it as the label for this column. The language of the label will actually be, or the language of the caption will be in the language of the user who is running the report. Now I have activated this for all of my fields. To test it, I'm just going to compile or save my report, but you will notice there is an error. Why do we have the error? Well, I have also activated the include caption for the last field. But the last field is not coming from a table, it's actually a variable. And you can only activate the include caption for a column which is actually coming from a table. So that's logical that we get this error. I just wanted to demonstrate it. The next thing that we can also do is we can go into the view menu and we can go and activate our labels. Now, labels are actually used to replace text constants. A label is something which I'm going to give a name. So, for example, reports name is the name of my label. And then in the caption property, I will say this is inventory by location. Inventory by location. I also have the possibility to translate this in the multi-language editor. And a label is also going to be sent to the layout. Now, what's the difference between using a label and between using a text constant? Well, let me demonstrate it. Very quickly, going to the globals text constants txt001. I'm just going to put the value test in here. The text constant I also, after I created, I need to add it into the data sets as a column. Let's do this. Let's save our report. Now I always advise you to save your report twice so that actually the service tier will pick up the changes that you make. Next I will go actually and I'm going to the layouts of my reports to show you where we can find our fields and labels. For this I'm going to make use of Report Builder. The same thing is actually also valid when you are going to make use of Visual Studio. So here on the left side I will see my dataset at runtime, and as you can see, I can see all of my columns including my text constants. The labels and the captions that I sent with the dataset are actually here as parameters. So at runtime they will not be a part of the dataset. And that's very important to remember, because if I'm just going to run my report right now, there is still no layouts, but I'm still going to have a look at the dataset. So activate the feature, go into preview. And once I can see the preview, I will open the runtime dataset again. What you will notice is that, okay, I'm not seeing my captions and labels in here, which is a good thing, because they were in the language of the user. They will always have the same value. I don't need them repeated on every line, except here for my text constant, which is actually also always having the same value, but it's the same value on every line. So that's why we're not using text constants for this purpose. We're going to make use of labels and captions because we don't want to increase the size of the dataset with information that's not required to be available on every line. So very important to know that we need to use here the include caption property, and we can actually make use of labels that need to be sent to the report layout. So via the label designer and the include caption option, we can actually add labels on our reports, but sometimes we need to have them available in the datasets. Let's see why and how we can do this. So what we are going to do actually is we're going to make use of the field caption function. Field caption is a function we are going to use to be able to send the label of a field in the datasets. Why are we going to do this? Well, in the case that the report needs to be displayed in the language of the recipient instead of the language of the user. So you would like to have the same report to be sent to different recipients, and the language needs to change depending on who we are sending it to. In that case, we are going to decide via programming, which will be the language of the labels, and then we need to add them in the datasets. Let me demonstrate this in the application. Here in the application, what I have opened here is the document report for the sales invoice. We have lots of data items in here. And if we are going to scroll a little bit to the bottom, what you will see sometimes is that certain fields are sent by making use of the field caption function, and they're added in the dataset of the reports. And these are actually fields for which we would like to have the label available in the layout, but we're not going to use include caption, or we're not going to make use of the label designer, but we would like actually the caption of the field description to be sent in the dataset. Then later on in the coding of the report, what we are going to do is we are going to write a little bit of code, which is actually usually in here. And then depending of the language code of the sales invoice or the recipient, we are going to modify the language of the report, the current report. So for this line, for this record, for this invoice in the dataset, the actual language of the label will be in the language of the recipient. So if you need to do this, then you can't use labels and you can't use include caption, then we're going to use field caption. But remember that if you are going to be adding fields in the dataset will grow, so that's less interesting for performance. So you only should do this if it's really required. If you don't require it, then use the label designer or use the include caption property to optimize the size of your datasets.